The human ship Endeavour moved slowly through space toward the alien planet. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched the brown and red world grow larger on the main screen. 3 years of planning had led to this moment. The Corvan Empire controlled the most important trade routes in this part of the galaxy. If humans wanted to expand beyond their small corner of space, they needed the Corvans as partners. "Sir, they're sending us landing coordinates," reported the communications officer. Jake nodded. "Take us down, Lieutenant." In the diplomatic quarters, Katie Walsh checked her uniform one last time. The navy blue fabric was perfectly pressed, and her small silver name tag caught the light. At 28 years old, she was the youngest member of the diplomatic team. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her green eyes showed the calm focus that had served her well in her previous military assignments. Ambassador Ryan Carter knocked on her door. "Ready, Walsh?" "Yes, sir." Katie picked up her data, pad, and followed the older man down the corridor. Carter had been a diplomat for 20 years. His gray hair and lined face showed the stress of countless negotiations. They met Commander Morrison in the shuttle bay. Jake was 42, tall and broad-shouldered, with short black hair and serious brown eyes. He wore his dress uniform with the ease of someone who had commanded ships for over a decade. "Remember," Carter said as they boarded the shuttle, "the Corvans respect strength above everything else. They see diplomacy as something weak species do when they can't fight. We need to prove we're worth their time." Katie strapped herself into her seat. "What do we know about their culture, sir?" "They're warriors," Jake answered. "Their entire society is built around physical power and combat ability. The strongest lead, the weak serve. They've been expanding their empire for 300 years. Through conquest." The shuttle shook as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small window, Katie could see massive cities made of black stone and metal. Tall spires reached toward the sky like claws. Everything looked built for war. "Their homeworld has twice Earth's gravity," Carter added. "That's why they're so much larger and stronger than us. What seems normal to them would crush most humans." The shuttle landed in a courtyard surrounded by dark walls. Katie felt the extra gravity immediately as she stood up. Her body suddenly weighed twice as much as normal. Every step required more effort. She kept her face calm, but inside she noted how this would affect human movement and reaction time. The shuttle doors opened, and Katie got her first look at the Corvans. They were enormous. The smallest warrior she could see stood at least 7.5 feet tall. Most were closer to 8 feet. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like thick, dark plates. Each Corvan had 4 arms, all heavily muscled. Their heads were large and angular, with 4 yellow eyes that seemed to see everything. "By the stars," Carter whispered. The reports didn't do them justice. A group of Corvan warriors approached the shuttle. Their leader wore more elaborate armor with red markings, his 4 eyes fixed on the human delegation as they stepped down the ramp. "I am General Wachter," the alien said in heavily accented English. His voice was deep and rough like grinding stone. "I will take you to Warlord Zektar." Katie noticed how the general's eyes lingered on her. She was by far the smallest member of the human team. Next to these massive aliens, she probably looked like a child. They walked through corridors lined with weapons and battle trophies. Corvan warriors stopped their training to stare at the humans. Katie heard them making sounds that might have been laughter. She kept her expression neutral and professional. The throne room was vast, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Weapons covered the walls. At the far end, on a throne made from what looked like the bones of some enormous creature, sat Warlord Zektar. He was the largest Corvan Katie had ever seen. His armor was black with gold trim, and scars covered his visible skin. When he stood to greet them, he towered over even his own warriors. His 4 eyes studied the humans like a predator examining prey. "So," Zektar said, his voice echoing, "in the Great Hall, these are the humans who wish to trade with the Corvan Empire." Ambassador Carter stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Warlord Zektar, we are honored to meet you." "I am Ambassador Ryan Carter, representing the United Earth government." Zektar's eyes moved across the delegation. They stopped on Jake first. "This one has the look of a warrior," he said. "Small, but there is strength in his stance." Then his gaze fell on Carter. "This one is old but carries himself with authority. He may be worth listening to." Finally, his four eyes focused on Katie. The room fell silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat. She could feel every Corvan warrior staring at her. "And what is this?" Zektar asked, his voice filled with what sounded like amusement. "You bring children to negotiate with warriors?" Katie kept her face calm. She had dealt with dismissive attitudes before, though never from 8-foot-tall aliens. "This female looks like she would break in a strong wind," Zektar continued. Several of his warriors made those grinding sounds again. "Tell me, human ambassador, do your people have so few adults that you must bring younglings to important meetings?" Carter's jaw tightened. "Attach Walsh is a fully qualified diplomat, Warlord. She has extensive experience in—" "Experience?" Zektar laughed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. "Look at her. She is smaller than our children. How can such a weak creature have any experience worth mentioning?" Katie felt the weight of every eye in the room. The Corvan warriors were enjoying this. To them, she represented everything weak about humanity, small, quiet, and apparently harmless. "In Corvan society," Zektar said, settling back onto his throne, "the weak serve the strong. It is the natural order. Your species seems to have forgotten this basic truth." He gestured dismissively toward Katie. "If this is the best your people can offer, then perhaps we are wasting our time. How can we trust trade routes to beings who cannot even protect their own females from a gentle breeze?" Katie's hands remained clasped behind her back. Her breathing stayed steady. But Jake, who had served with her before, noticed the tiny tightening around her eyes. He had seen that look once before, right before she had single-handedly disabled an entire enemy communications array. "We appreciate your time, Warlord," Carter said carefully. "Perhaps we could discuss the specific terms of—" "Terms?" Zektar interrupted. "There will be no terms until you prove your species is worth our attention. Send this weak female away so we can speak with real representatives." The throne room erupted in grinding laughter from the Corvan warriors. Katie stood perfectly still, her green eyes fixed on a point just above the warlord's head. Her expression never changed, but inside she was making calculations. 3 days passed, and the negotiations went nowhere. Every morning, the human delegation sat across from Corvan officials in a cold stone room. Every evening they returned to their quarters with nothing to show for their efforts. The Corvans refused to discuss trade routes, mining rights, or technology sharing. Instead, they kept talking about human weakness. How could such small beings protect cargo ships? How could they defend against pirates? What good were partners who looked like they might break if someone spoke too loudly? Katie sat quietly during these meetings, taking notes on her datapad. She watched the Corvan officials speak and tried to understand their culture better. But it was hard to focus when they kept pointing at her as an example of human frailty. "Look at their female," one official said on the second day. "She has not spoken once. In our society, only the weak stay silent." Ambassador Carter tried to explain that Katie was there to observe and learn. The Corvans just laughed their grinding, rocky laugh on the second evening. Katie met someone who would make her life much more difficult. She was walking back to her quarters when a massive shadow fell across her path. "You must be the weak human. Female my father told me about." Katie looked up to see the largest Corvan she had encountered yet. He was even bigger than Warlord Zektar, with broader shoulders and longer arms. His armor was polished black with silver details. Most importantly, he wore the red sash that marked him as the Warlord's son. "I am Drakter," he said, looking down at her like she was an interesting insect. "Heir to the Corvan throne and commander of the 3rd Battle Fleet." Katie stopped walking and faced him properly. "Attach Katie Walsh, United Earth Diplomatic." "Cores," Drakter circled her slowly, his 4 eyes taking in every detail. "Walsh, such a strange sound. In our language, it would mean small broken thing. How interesting. Katie replied in the same calm tone she used for all diplomatic conversations. You are even smaller up close, Drakter continued. I have seen our children who are larger than you. Do all human females look so ... Fragile? Katie kept her hands clasped behind her back. Human females come in many different sizes, just like human males. But you are supposed to be a representative of your people, Drakter said. He moved closer, forcing Katie to look up to meet his eyes. What message does it send when you cannot even reach my shoulder? Before Katie could answer, Jake appeared around the corner. He took in the situation quickly and approached them. Commander. Morrison, Katie said without turning around. This is Drakter, son of Warlord Zektar, Jake nodded politely. Your Highness. I hope you're finding our discussions productive. Drakter laughed. Productive? Your people speak of trade, but what do you have to offer? Your technology is simple. Your ships are slow. Your warriors are tiny, he gestured toward Katie. Even. Your diplomats look like they need protection from a light breeze. I think Attach Walsh can take care of herself, Jake said carefully. Can she? Drakter reached out with one massive hand and flicked Katie's shoulder with one finger. The gesture was meant to look playful, but it carried enough force to make her take a step back. See? Barely a touch, and she almost falls over. Katie straightened her uniform and looked directly at Drakter. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss, Your Highness? Her calm response seemed to irritate him. I wanted to see for myself how weak your species really is. I was not disappointed. From that moment on, Drakter made Katie's life miserable. He appeared everywhere she went. When she walked to the meeting rooms, he would fall into step beside her, making comments about human weakness. When she sat in the diplomatic sessions, he would enter the room and stare at her until she looked up, then shake his head as if disappointed. Look, how she sits, he would tell his warriors, like a child trying to appear important. Watch how carefully she walks, he said another time. Each step looks like it might be her last. Even her voice is weak, he announced when Katie finally spoke during a meeting. Do all human females sound like frightened birds? Katie endured it all without comment. She had been trained to handle difficult situations with grace. Diplomacy meant staying calm when others tried to provoke you. She focused on her mission and ignored the harassment, but Jake noticed the tiny signs of stress. The way Katie's pen gripped a little tighter when Drakter entered a room. How her jaw muscles tensed when he made his crude comments. The fact that she had started checking over her shoulder when walking alone. On the third evening, the Kovans hosted a formal dinner for the human delegation. The great hall was filled with warriors and officials. Long tables held strange alien foods that smelled like metal and spices. Katie sat between Carter and Jake, wearing her dress uniform. She tried to eat the Korvan food politely, though most of it tasted terrible to human senses. The conversation flowed around her in a mixture of English and the Korvan language. Halfway through the meal, Drakter stood up from the high table where he sat with his father. He walked down to where the humans were seated, carrying a large cup of something that looked like liquid fire. I wish to make a toast, he announced loudly. The entire hall fell silent. To our human guests who have traveled so far to visit? U.S., he moved behind Katie's chair as he spoke. They come to us seeking partnership. They offer us their friendship. His voice carried easily across the silent room. They ask us to trust them with our most valuable trade routes. Drakter placed one massive hand on the back of Katie's chair. She could feel the heat from his body and smell the metallic scent of his armor. But how can we trust beings so weak they might blow away in a strong wind? As he said this, he moved forward slightly. His arm accidentally bumped into Katie's shoulder, hard enough to push her forward into the table. The impact sent her plate flying. Korvan food splattered across her uniform and onto the floor. Dark sauce stained her jacket, and pieces of alien meat stuck to her sleeves. The hall erupted in grinding Korvan laughter. Warriors pointed at Katie as she sat there covered in food, looking like she had been attacked by her own dinner. Oh, Drakter said, his voice full of fake concern, how clumsy of me. I barely touched you, and look what happened. Katie sat perfectly still for a moment. Then she carefully picked a piece of meat off her jacket and placed it on her plate. She took her napkin and wiped the sauce from her face. She did not look at Drakter. She did not look at the laughing warriors, but Jake saw something change. In her eyes, something cold and dangerous that he remembered from their military days. Ambassador Carter stood up quickly. Your Highness, I believe that was an accident, but I must protest. Warlord Zektar waved one hand dismissively. My son was only being friendly. If your female cannot handle friendly contact, how can she handle serious business? Perhaps. Zektar continued, your people should send stronger representatives next time. Ones who do not fall over when someone walks past them. The laughter grew louder. Katie finished cleaning herself up and looked straight ahead. Her breathing was controlled, her hands were steady, but something fundamental had shifted. After the dinner, Jake found Katie in her quarters. She had changed into a clean uniform and was reading reports on her datapad. How are you holding up, Walsh? He asked. Katie looked up from her reading. I'm fine, sir, just reviewing tomorrow's agenda. Katie? Jake used her first name, which he rarely did. I know what you're thinking. Remember why we're here. Katie set down her datapad and looked at him directly. I remember everything, sir. There was something in her voice that made Jake worry. He had seen Katie angry before, back when they served together. It was not loud or obvious. It was quiet and focused and absolutely terrifying. These negotiations are important, he said. Carefully, yes, sir, they are. Katie picked up her datapad again. Is there anything else you need? Jake studied her face for a moment longer. No, that's all. Get some rest. As he left her quarters, Jake wondered if he should have said more. But Katie was a professional. She would do her job. What he did not realize was that Katie was starting to think her job might require more than just diplomacy. The fourth day started like the others. Ambassador Carter sat across from Corvan officials, trying to discuss trade agreements. The aliens listened with bored expressions and made the same complaints about human weakness. Katie took notes and said nothing, but today was different. Warlord Zektar had arranged a special tour of the Corvan Military Academy. He wanted the humans to see how real warriors were trained. Perhaps, he said with his grinding laugh, seeing true strength will help you understand why we have concerns about your people. The academy was a massive complex of training halls and combat arenas. Young Corvan warriors practiced with weapons that looked like they could cut through steel. Others lifted weights that would crush a human. The sound of combat filled the air, metal against metal, roars of effort, and the crash of bodies hitting. The ground. Katie walked with the delegation, observing everything. She noted the fighting techniques, the weapon designs, and the training methods. Her military background made her see things the other diplomats missed. Impressive, Ambassador, Carter said politely as they watched two young Corvans battle with sword-like weapons. These are children, General Wachter explained. They have been training for only 5 years. Any one of them could defeat your strongest human warrior. Jake kept his expression neutral, but Katie saw his eyes tracking the movements of the young fighters. He was making the same calculations she was. The tour continued through different sections of the academy. Katie noticed that Drakter had joined their group. He walked behind her, making quiet comments to his warriors about human frailty. She could feel his 4 eyes on her back. They entered a hall where older students practiced hand-to-hand combat. These Corvans were nearly full-grown, standing 7.5 feet tall. They fought without weapons, using all 4 arms in complex grappling techniques. Now this is real combat, Drakter said loudly. No hiding behind technology or weapons. Just pure strength against strength. He moved closer to Katie. Tell me, little bird, have you ever seen anything like this in your human military? Katie watched 2 students locked in combat. One threw the other across the training mat with tremendous force. It's very impressive, she said in her diplomatic voice. Impressive, Drakter repeated mockingly. Such a weak word from a weak creature. He stepped directly in front of her, blocking her view of the combat. In our society, words like impressive mean nothing, only action matters. Katie looked up at him calmly. I understand your culture values physical strength above all else. Do you? Drakter leaned down until his face was only inches from hers. Because you speak of understanding, but I see no strength in you at all. You are like a broken toy pretending to be useful. Ambassador Carter noticed the confrontation and started to move toward them, but Drakter was not finished. Look at you, he continued, standing there like a frightened child. In Corvan society, weaklings like you would not be allowed to live. We would put you out of your misery as an act of kindness. Katie's hands remained clasped behind her back. Her breathing stayed steady. That's an interesting perspective on social organization. Her calm response made Drakter angrier. He had been trying to provoke her for days, and she never reacted. Her constant professional composure made him look foolish in front of his warriors. You think your politeness makes you strong? He snarled. You think your calm words impress anyone? You are nothing but a waste of space, taking up room that a real warrior could use. The training hall began to go quiet. Other Corvans stopped their exercises to watch the confrontation. Word spread quickly, and more warriors gathered around. Katie tried to step around Drakter to rejoin her delegation. But as she moved to his left, he shifted to block her path. When she tried to go right, he moved again. I was not finished talking. To you, little bird, he said with a cruel smile. Jake noticed what was happening and started walking toward them. But the crowd of Corvan warriors was thick, and he had to push through carefully to avoid causing a diplomatic incident. Your son seems very interested in our attach, Carter said to Warlord Zektar. Trying to defuse the situation, Zektar watched with amusement. Drakter is simply curious about your people. He has never seen beings so small and weak. Back in the crowd, Drakter had stopped pretending to be polite. You know what I think? He said, looming over Katie. I think your people sent you here as a joke. A way to insult us by showing how little they respect our power. Katie looked directly into his 4 yellow eyes. I assure you, Your Highness, that was not the intention, no? Drakter reached out with one massive hand and grabbed Katie's shoulder. His grip was strong enough to crush human bones. Then why did they send something so pathetic? Katie felt the pressure of his grip, but did not flinch. Please remove your hand, or what? Drakter squeezed harder. What will you do, little bird? Cry? Run away? Call for help? The training hall was completely silent now. Every Corvan warrior was watching. Even the instructors had stopped their lessons to see what would happen. Katie looked up at Drakter calmly. I'm asking you politely to let me go. Drakter laughed and squeezed even harder. And I am telling you that weak creatures do not make demands of their superiors. That was when something changed in Katie's eyes. The professional diplomatic mask slipped for just a moment, and Drakter saw something that made him pause. Something. Cold and dangerous and completely unafraid. Neither was I, Katie said quietly, but Drakter was too angry and too proud to back down now. He had gone too far to stop. In front of hundreds of Corvan warriors, he could not let a tiny human female have the last word. You want to be treated like a real being? He shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Then prove you deserve it. He released her shoulder and stepped back, spreading all 4 arms wide. I, Drakter, son of Warlord Zektar and heir to the Corvan throne, challenge this pathetic human to single combat. The hall erupted in excited roars from the Corvan warriors. This was what they had been waiting for, a chance to see human weakness exposed completely. If this female can survive 1 minute in combat with me, Drakter announced, we will consider. Your species worthy of our time and attention? He turned to face the crowd, his voice growing louder. But when she falls in the first few seconds, when she breaks like the fragile toy she is, your people will leave our world in shame. You will admit that humans are too weak to be our partners. The crowd roared its approval. Bets were already being made on how quickly the small human would be defeated. Some warriors laughed at the very idea that she might last even 30 seconds. Warlord. Zektar rose from where he had been watching. This is highly irregular, he said, but his voice carried amusement rather than disapproval. A formal combat challenge cannot be issued lightly. Then let her refuse, Drakter said with a cruel smile. Let her show everyone what human courage really looks like. Ambassador Carter pushed through the crowd, his face pale. Attach Walsh, you don't have to accept this. We can file a formal protest with the Warlord. Jake finally reached them, breathing hard from pushing through the massive aliens. Katie, this is not part of our mission. Katie looked around the hall at hundreds of Corvan faces. All of them expected her to refuse. All of them expected her to back down like the weak human they thought she was. They wanted to see her fear, her tears, her desperate attempts to escape an impossible situation. Instead, she stepped forward until she stood directly in front of Drakter, even with him. Leaning down, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I accept your challenge, she said in a clear, steady voice that carried across the entire hall. The silence that followed was so complete that Katie could hear her own heartbeat. Even Drakter looked surprised. He had expected her to refuse, to beg, to hide behind her diplomatic immunity. You ... he said, as if he had not heard correctly. Katie nodded once. 1 minute of single combat. When I win, you will proceed with the trade negotiations in good faith and treat all members of our delegation with proper respect. The crowd exploded in laughter. The idea that this tiny human could win against Drakter was the funniest thing they had ever heard, but Jake was not laughing. He was remembering a night 3 years ago when Katie had asked him almost the same question. What will you do if I win? He was starting to think the Corvans had made a very serious mistake. The training hall buzzed with excitement as word spread through the academy. Warriors poured in from other sections, eager to watch the tiny human female get crushed by the Warlord's son. Within minutes, the circular combat area was surrounded by hundreds of Corvan fighters, all pushing for the best view. Drakter strutted around the edge of the circle, accepting praise from his fellow warriors. He pulled off his ceremonial armor piece by piece, revealing the natural chitinous plates that covered his dark skin. His forearms flexed as he stretched, showing muscles that looked like they could bend steel bars. Look at him, one warrior said loudly. The prince is in perfect condition. This will be over in seconds. I feel sorry for the little human, another laughed. She probably does not even know how to fight. Katie stood quietly on the opposite side of the circle. She removed her diplomatic jacket and folded it carefully. Underneath, she wore a simple white shirt that showed the lean muscle of someone who spent hours in physical training every day. Ambassador Carter rushed up to her. Katie, this is insane. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. Katie rolled her shoulders and stretched her neck. There is no other way, sir. They will never respect us until we prove ourselves. But he's 3 times your size, Carter protested. He could kill you by accident. Katie looked across the circle at Drakter, who was now showing off for the crowd by lifting a training weight that probably weighed more than she did. Size isn't everything, sir. Jake appeared beside them, his face grim. Walsh, I've seen you fight, but this is different. The gravity here makes everything harder. Your reflexes will be slower. My reflexes will be fine, Katie said calmly. She pulled her hair back into a tighter ponytail and checked that her boots were properly laced. Just trust me. What's your plan? Jake asked quietly. Katie smiled for the first time in days. It was not a diplomatic smile. It was the smile of someone who had been pushed too far and was finally allowed to push back. Survive 1 minute. Across the circle, Drakter had finished his warm-up routine. He stood in the center of the combat area, all 4 arms spread wide, looking like some ancient war god. The crowd roared its approval. Behold, he shouted, the heir to the Corvan throne, undefeated in 137 battles. The warriors cheered louder. Some threw pieces of equipment into the air. Others chanted Drakter's name in their grinding voices. General Wachter stepped forward to act as referee. The terms are simple, he announced. Single combat, no weapons, 1 minute duration. If the human survives the full minute, the Corvans will treat future negotiations with proper respect. He looked at Katie skeptically. If she falls before? The minute ends, the humans leave our world immediately and do not return. Warlord Zektar settled into a chair that had been brought for him. I almost feel guilty watching this, he said to his advisors. It will be like watching a child fight a storm. Katie stepped into the circle. The difference in size became even more obvious when she stood near Drakter. Her head barely reached his chest. His forearms could probably wrap around her entire body twice. Last chance to surrender, little bird, Drakter said, looking down at her. I promise to make it quick. Katie took a fighting stance that the Corvins did not recognize. Her feet were shoulder-width apart, her hands loose at her sides. Her weight balanced perfectly. 1 minute, she said. Starting now. General Voctor raised his hand. Begin, Drakter charged immediately. He came forward like a freight train, all 4 arms reaching out to grab the tiny human. His strategy was simple. Catch her, lift her up, and slam her to the ground hard enough to end the fight in seconds. The crowd roared, already celebrating his certain victory. Some warriors were not even watching, confident that the fight would be over before they could focus their eyes. But when Drakter's massive hands closed around empty air, the roaring stopped. Katie was not there anymore. She had moved at the last possible second, stepping to her left with fluid grace. Drakter's momentum carried him past her, and as he thundered by, she did something that made every Corvan in the hall blink in confusion. She hit him. It was not a wild swing or a desperate slap. It was a precise strike to a nerve cluster just behind his primary shoulder joint. Katie's fist connected with surgical accuracy, and Drakter stumbled forward with a grunt of surprise. Impossible, someone in the crowd whispered. Drakter spun around, more shocked than hurt. In 137 fights, no opponent had ever hit him in the opening seconds. Most were too busy being crushed. Lucky shot, he snarled. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. He came at her again, this time more cautiously. Instead of a wild charge, he advanced with his 4 arms spread wide, trying to corner her against the edge of the circle. Katie backpedaled, staying just out of reach. When Drakter threw a punch with his primary right arm, she ducked under it and moved to his left side. When he tried to grab her with his secondary arms, she was already gone. Stand still and fight, Drakter roared, swinging wildly. I am fighting, Katie replied calmly, slipping past another grab attempt. The crowd was getting restless. This was not going the way anyone expected. The human was supposed to be on the ground by now, broken and defeated. Instead, she moved around Drakter like water flowing around a rock. She's just running away, one warrior complained. Coward, another shouted. Face him properly. But Jake and Katie's other military colleagues knew better. She was not running. She was studying. Every movement Drakter made, every technique he tried, every opening in his defense, Katie was cataloging it all. 30 seconds into the fight, Drakter was breathing harder than he should have been. Chasing the quick human around the circle was more exhausting than he expected. His wild swings were getting slower and less accurate. Katie noticed the change immediately. Time to shift tactics. The next time Drakter charged instead of moving. Away, Katie stepped forward to meet him. She ducked under his grasping arms and drove her knee upward into his solar plexus with perfect timing. The impact was not enough to seriously hurt him, but it drove the air from his lungs. Drakter doubled over, gasping, and Katie was already moving again. What is she doing? General Voctor demanded. Fighting, Jake said quietly. Really fighting. The crowd was no longer cheering. Confused murmurs rippled through the assembled warriors. This was not supposed to happen. Humans were weak. Everyone knew that. Drakter straightened up, his 4 eyes blazing with fury. Enough games. He bellowed. He lunged at Katie with all 4 arms, trying to overwhelm her with pure aggression. For a moment, it looked like it might work. His massive reach forced her back toward the edge of the circle, but then Katie did something that made every Corvin in the hall go silent. As Drakter's primary hand shot toward her face. She caught his wrist. Not blocked it, not deflected it. Caught it. Her small human hand wrapped around his thick alien wrist and stopped his punch cold, for just a second. They stood locked together, the massive alien warrior and the tiny human diplomat. Drakter tried to pull his arm free and found that he could not. Katie's grip was like iron. How? He whispered. Katie looked up at him with those calm green eyes. Leverage, she said. Then she pivoted, used his own momentum against him, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent 400 pounds of alien warrior flying through the air. Drakter hit the ground with a crash that shook the entire hall. Dust rose from the impact crater his body made in the training mat. That the silence was so complete that Katie could hear the sound of her own breathing. 47 seconds, Jake called out, checking his sage RONOMETAR. Katie stood over the stunned alien prince, not even breathing hard. 13 seconds to spare, she said. Then she offered Drakter her hand to help him up. Drakter stared up at Katie's outstretched hand as if he had never seen one before. Around them, the training hall remained completely silent. Hundreds of Corvan warriors stood frozen, their 4 eyes wide with shock. The prince of the Corvan Empire had just been thrown to the ground by a creature half his size. Slowly, Drakter reached up and took Katie's hand. She helped pull him to his feet, which was no small task given that he weighed 3 times as much as she did. When he stood, he looked down at her with something that might have been respect. How? He asked quietly. His voice carried none of its earlier arrogance. Katie brushed dust off her shirt and straightened her ponytail. Physics, she said simply. Force equals mass times acceleration. When you use your own momentum against you, size becomes a disadvantage. The crowd began to murmur. Warriors who had been laughing moments before now looked confused and worried. Their champion had fallen. Their understanding of human weakness had just been shattered. Warlord Zektar rose slowly from his chair. His 4 eyes never left Katie as he walked into the circle. When he reached them, he towered over both his son and the small human. What are you? He asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Katie looked up at the massive warlord without fear. I am attached Katie Walsh of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. That tells me your title, not what you are, Zektar said. No diplomat should be able to defeat my son in combat. Drakter has trained his entire life to be a warrior. Katie glanced around at the crowd of staring aliens. I suppose there are some things we haven't mentioned about human culture. Ambassador Carter pushed through the crowd, his face pale but relieved. Katie, are you injured? I'm fine, sir. Katie turned back to Zektar. Would you like to know about my background, Warlord? Zektar nodded slowly. The entire hall leaned forward to listen. Before I joined the Diplomatic Corps, I served 3 years as a combat engineer with the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, Katie began. My job was to go behind enemy lines and destroy things that needed destroying. She paused to let that sink in. Several Corvan warriors exchanged glances. Before that, I spent 4 years studying at the Earth Military Academy. I graduated 3rd in my class in tactical combat and 1st in hand-to-hand fighting techniques. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. This tiny creature was not what she appeared to be. And before the military academy, Katie continued, I spent 6 years training in martial arts. I hold black belts in 3 different fighting styles and was regional champion in mixed combat sports for 2 consecutive years. Drakter's mouth fell open. You are a warrior? Katie smiled slightly. I prefer to think of myself as someone who is very good at solving problems. Sometimes those problems involve combat. Sometimes they involve diplomacy. But you look so ... double quotes. Drakter struggled for words. Small? Weak? Harmless? Katie's smile grew wider. That's exactly the point. In human military doctrine, we call it strategic deception. Let your enemy underestimate you, then use their assumptions against them. General Wachter stepped forward. You allowed us to insult you for 4 days. You endured harassment and humiliation. Why? Katie's expression became serious again. Because my mission was to establish trade relations with your people, not to start a war. Diplomacy means finding peaceful solutions even when others try to provoke you. She looked directly at Drakter. But when you grabbed me and issued a formal challenge, you changed the rules. At that point, defending myself became necessary to complete the mission. Warlord Zektar was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. Not the cruel, grinding laugh the humans had heard before, but something that sounded almost like genuine amusement. Incredible, he said. For days we have been insulting you as weak and useless. All this time, you could have ended our mockery with a single demonstration of your abilities. Violence should always be the last option, Katie replied. But when it becomes necessary, it should be decisive. The crowd of warriors began talking among themselves. The conversations were in the Corvan language, but the tone was very different from before. Instead of mockery, there was discussion and even admiration. Drakter rubbed his shoulder where he had hit the ground. You could have seriously injured me? You had many opportunities during our fight. That was never the goal, Katie said. You challenged me to survive 1 minute, not to hurt you. I only used the force necessary to win within the rules. But you could have done more damage. Katie's expression became very serious. Your Highness, combat engineering is not just about building things. It's also about taking them apart very efficiently. If my goal had been to harm you, this conversation would not be happening. The training hall fell silent again as the implications of her words sank in. Jake stepped forward. If I may, Warlord Zektar, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about human capabilities. Explain, Zektar commanded. Humans don't value physical strength the way Corvans do, Jake said. We value adaptability, intelligence, and teamwork. We've learned to fight smarter rather than just harder. Ambassador Carter nodded. That's why we're here seeking partnerships rather than demanding territory through conquest. We prefer to build alliances with peoples like the Corvans who can complement our abilities. Drakter looked at Katie with new eyes. You said you were a combat engineer. What does that mean exactly? It means I can build a bridge across a river in 6 hours. Or I can blow up an enemy bridge in 6 minutes, Katie explained. The same. Knowledge that lets me construct fortifications also lets me find weak points in enemy defenses. And now you are a diplomat? Diplomacy and warfare have more in common than most people realize, Katie said. Both require understanding your opponent, predicting their moves, and finding the most efficient path to your objective. Warlord Zektar sat back down in his chair, but his posture was different now. More thoughtful, less dismissive. Ambassador Carter, I believe we may have started these negotiations incorrectly. Carter stepped forward eagerly. We're prepared to discuss any concerns you might have, Warlord. My concerns were based on assumptions about your people's capabilities, Zektar admitted. If this small female represents the minimum level of competence among human representatives, then perhaps we have underestimated your entire species, Katie shook her head. I'm not the minimum, sir. I'm just one person with specific training. But every human brings different skills to any partnership. She gestured toward Jake and Carter. Commander Morrison has 15 years of experience commanding starships in dangerous situations. Ambassador Carter has successfully negotiated 23 different trade agreements with species across the galaxy. Each of us contributes something different. Drakter stepped closer to his father. Perhaps we should listen to what they have to offer. Zektar nodded slowly. Yes, I think we should. General Wachter, clear the hall. We will continue these discussions in the main conference room. As the crowd of warriors began to disperse, many of them approached Katie with respectful nods. A few even offered what looked like Corvan salutes. Drakter lingered as the others left. Attach Walsh, he said formally. I owe you an apology for my behavior over the past few days. Katie straightened her shirt and picked up her diplomatic jacket. Apology accepted, Your Highness? Everyone makes mistakes when dealing with unfamiliar cultures. Would you ... quote, Drakter hesitated. Would you be willing to teach some of our warriors your fighting techniques? Katie smiled as she put her jacket back on, transforming from combat specialist back into diplomat. I think cultural exchange programs would be an excellent addition to any trade agreement we establish. As they walked toward the conference room, Jake fell into step beside Katie. Feel better now? Katie nodded, her professional composure fully restored. Much better, sir. Though I do feel a little bad about not warning them. Warning them about. What? Katie's smile became slightly dangerous again. That choosing diplomacy isn't the same thing as being incapable of other options. 3 hours later, the humans and Corvans had reached a preliminary trade agreement that satisfied both parties. The Corvans would provide safe passage through their trade routes, and the humans would share certain technologies and training methods. As the Endeavor prepared to leave Corvan space, Draker requested a private meeting with Katie. I wanted to thank you, he said. You taught me something important about strength. What's that? Katie asked. That true strength isn't about how much you can lift or how hard you can hit, Draker said. It's about knowing when not to use your full power, Katie smiled. That's a very wise observation, Your Highness. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Katie stood at the observation deck watching the Corvan homeworld disappear behind them. The mission had been successful, but more importantly, two very different species had learned to understand each other. Sometimes the best diplomacy happened after you proved you did not need it.